Good evening. Welcome to Live United. Live United is an opportunity to hear about the great programs in the Monadnock region that are making a difference in the lives of our citizens. Today I'm very fortunate to have with me Laura Milliken from Spark, New Hampshire, and Marge Droppa from Impact Monadnock. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Good to be here.
And this is so exciting because there's some great stuff happening here in the Monadnock region around early childhood. And Laura, you join us from Spark, New Hampshire. Can you tell us a little bit about Spark?
Sure. So Spark, New Hampshire is the statewide governor-appointed Early Childhood Advisory Council for the state. And we have a vision that all children are healthy, learning, and thriving now and in the future, which is very similar to somebody else's vision in the Monadnock region. And we are working on better coordinating the early childhood system across health and early learning and family support. And so that's the work that we're doing. I brought a slide if you want to see what a comprehensive coordinated system looks like.
So we'll roll with that in a minute. And
Okay.
you mentioned that that we have a similar vision and mission here in the Monadnock region. And Marge, you want to tell us what that's about?
Yeah, we're really lucky in the Monadnock region because our work with Impact Monadnock, which is the same vision as Sparks, we're partnered with Monadnock United Way and Spark, New Hampshire to help make this a reality for our region. So not only do we have a regional effort going on here, but we also have this wonderful partnership at the state level, which gives our region all kinds of benefits. So we're really lucky to be partnered with Spark.
Well, and Spark, New Hampshire feels the same way about having the relationship with Impact Monadnock because we're really connected to the work that's going on in the Monadnock region and really on the ground. Spark, New Hampshire is working sort of at a policy level. So it's really wonderful to have that back and forth communication between the policy work at the state and the work that's going on in direct service work and other work in the Monadnock region.
So at the top of the show I mentioned that it was exciting what's happening, and one of the things that happened was Impact Monadnock really emerged from the Monadnock community saying we need to focus on thriving children and families and really thinking about our earliest, our youth and people prenatal all the way through and how their lives are impacted. And we're fortunate to have a relationship with Spark, New Hampshire, and now Spark and Monadnock United Way can partner along with Impact Monadnock to support them, and it's really great to see that happening. Now, you mentioned that Spark has a structure to it, and I'm sure everybody's wondering, a governor-appointed council, does that mean it's taxpayer-supported? How is this all happening? So perhaps Dave can pull up for us the slide that kind of shows us the structure, and you can speak to that, Laura, for us.
Sure. So while we're governor-appointed, there aren't actually any state dollars that are devoted. So what you're looking at is the Spark, New Hampshire functional model, and in the middle is the governor-appointed council. And of course, because it's governor-appointed, that's sort of a closed group. But you see around the edge all of our committees and task forces, which are open for folks around the state to join. And we do have folks from all around the state, and again from health and early learning and family support.
And let's talk a little bit, we can probably bring the slide down, but let's talk a little bit about those committees, because I think there's committees focused on policy, on workforce development.
That's right.
What are the other committees that people can people be involved?
Absolutely. They're open to the public if people have time. Most of them meet monthly, some of them meet every other month. So we have workforce and professional development, and we have communications and public awareness, which is a lot of the work that we do. We have a policy committee that's working on early childhood policies, again, across those sectors. And we have a quality of early childhood programs and services committee, which is both focused on quality and on access to those early childhood programs and services. We have an evaluation committee that evaluates the work that we do. And I am forgetting something, I think.
Data.
Oh, and we have a data committee that's focused on trying to better integrate the early childhood data that's out there, and also do a periodic needs assessment, how young children and their families in the state are doing.
So we have this amazing structure at the state level to really support local level. So Marge, how's that translating down to the local level for us?
So we launched in February, as you know, and one of my first meetings that I attended was the Executive Council to meet everybody on Spark, but also the Monadnock region is now represented on both the Policy Committee and the Data Committee. And Laura recommended that I sit on those two committees because they really do help put our work into practice. So there's lots of stuff that I've already used from the Policy Committee. And with the Data Committee, I get to see what all the other regional coordinators are doing around data collection and assessment, and that's still a work in progress. But I think even more exciting than that is, besides these monthly meetings that I attend, is that Spark New Hampshire and the Endowment for Health have enabled all the regional coordinators to come together in a community of practice. So maybe you'd like to talk a little bit more about that, Laura, because that's been a real new thing that's just been happening for all of us.
So around the state, there are other burgeoning early childhood initiatives like Impact Monadnock, and Spark New Hampshire, as the governor-appointed Early Childhood Advisory Council, thought that it would be very helpful for folks to get together because there are all these great initiatives that are basically laboratories for what works best for young children and families, and we wanted to be able to share that information and identify best practices and bring in training for folks as they lead these initiatives. And so that is, we're calling it a community of practice. And we, as Marge mentioned, have some funding from the Endowment for Health to help us to better coordinate our work and, as again, identify best practices.
And it's actually been great because we've already had 2 meetings now. And at the first one, we kind of talked about what do we want to achieve? And one of the things was mapping out what everybody's doing. So Impact Monadnock is the youngest initiative as far as years and months. But what's great about that is that we have a consultant that's working with us to help kind of asset map everything that's going on around the state. And getting that kind of information is really useful for us in the Monadnock region because then we can look at what other people have done, both their successes and their failures, and we can learn from those. And I must say, the regional coordinators are really generous with their stories of successes and failures, and we can use those to kind of push our initiative forward on a path that's already been tested. Mm-hmm. So that's a great thing that Spark and the Endowment for Health are kind of leading for us, not just here in the Monadnock region, but throughout the state.
Yeah,
so
sometimes
it's been wonderful.
A very good thing to be the new kid on the block because you can learn from other people's mistakes.
Absolutely.
So that's the...
And at the same time, perhaps come in with some new innovation.
Absolutely.
As well. And I'm curious on your thoughts, and I'll start with you, Laura. Why early childhood?
So why early childhood? Well, there is a great body of science that has shown the importance of those early years. That's the earliest, really before birth, and certainly just after birth, children's brains are developing at a rate that is unprecedented. We're talking about neural connections being made at a rate of 700 per second, which is huge. And that's if the child is stimulated in ways that build that brain architecture. And if they have those serve and return, we call them serve and return interactions. So a child will babble and reach out for her mother or his father, and the parent will in turn talk back to them, and that back and forth is literally building the architecture of the brain. And the architecture that's built in those early years, it's like a house. The foundation is built, and it can be built in a strong way or in a fragile way. And by having high quality early learning interactions and interactions with parents, we can ensure a sturdy brain architecture. And then all the learning and behavior and life that follows can be built on that.
And Marge, why early childhood in the Monadnock region, and why now?
So, as you know, in 2012, Monadnock United Way, the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, and the New Hampshire Center for Public Policy presented this needs assessment to the region, which basically said that there were three top priority areas of concern for our region. One of those was child welfare, the other was economic opportunity, and the third was educational attainment. And what was quickly understood by the community using, the collective impact process that we use here with the Impact Monadnock initiative and with United Way is that all three of those areas are interlocked. They're braided, and you can't separate one out from the other because they all impact one another. So there was no way to prioritize child welfare, for example, over educational attainment, understanding that they impact one another. So what to do? So for the next year or so, the community really came together to decide, well, what's the highest leverage opportunity to tackle all those three areas of concern at once? And after doing a lot of research and through the collective impact process, it was decided that the highest leverage opportunity is to focus on your very youngest children, your birth to 5 population, but most importantly, their families as well. So not only should children be healthy, learning, and thriving, but their families need to be healthy, learning, and thriving because, again, each impact one another. And so once this decision was made to focus on that young birth to 5 and their families, then the community again came together and Impact Monadnock was launched and chose Spark New Hampshire as the backbone organization along with Monadnock United Way to actually put the boots on the ground, so to speak. So what I always like to say to people as I go around the region presenting this information about Impact Monadnock is this is all based on the research. And Spark New Hampshire has some great videos that we show as part of our presentation. And I think we showed them the last time I was on, but basically the neuroscience is very strong and it's really coming to the forefront now. And interestingly, I think, Laura, a lot of public policy makers are taking note of it as well. And I think what's been happening with these conversations with the candidate on WMUR is been really interesting because it is being supported by early childhood advocates now, and it's public policymakers are having to take note of the neuroscience that's been out there for a while.
I think that's
And Laura, I was actually going to ask you, why is the state placing so much emphasis on this now? I mean, when you consider the fact that they formed Spark New Hampshire as a governor-appointed council, they obviously feel like this is an incredibly important issue for the Granite State.
Right. Well, and in fact, Congress thought that it was pretty important. So in 2007, they passed the Head Start for School Readiness Act and asked every state to have an early childhood advisory council. And there was a group that worked on it thereafter and kind of set up the structure of the council. But in 2011, Governor Lynch, by executive order, launched Spark New Hampshire. And why they thought it, I think that anyone who looks at the research that's been done about the effect of intervention in early childhood will see what a great investment it is. That it's not about, it's certainly a great investment in a particular child or a particular family, but it's really an investment in all of our futures in New Hampshire. If we want a solid future, we need to invest in the kind of a generation of young people who will be able to lead our communities and grow our economy and in the future. And when you look at, how to do that, science tells us the best way to do that is by making sure that children have those high quality, interactive early experiences. And so that's what I think Spark New Hampshire is about, and that's what Impact Monadnock is about, ensuring that kids get the best start.
Yes, and when you think about that high quality, I think people oftentimes think, well, it's giving kids good experiences, it's good parenting, it's, but you have a workforce development committee.
Right.
Having quality care available to our children early on in their lives, whether that's prenatal or all the way through before they enter school systems, is just so critical. So talk a little bit about some of these committees and the work that they're doing. And Marge, jump in with some of what you're beginning to develop here from a committee structure to sort of build on what the state's doing and really grow our effort here in the Monadnock region.
Well, we want to be sure that that everyone who has any kind of interaction with children, is understands the way that their brains develop, understands how to best help them get their best start. And so our Workforce and Professional Development Committee is looking at making sure that everybody who works with young children understands how child development works, really understands. And you'd think that that was kind of obvious, but even pediatricians sometimes don't really understand that. And they have a lot to remember. There's a lot going on, but the brain architecture is so fundamental to everything else. So I think that, and I don't at all mean to bust on pediatricians. My sister's a pediatrician, and they're very, very concerned about them, and most of them very well understand how important not just health is to young children, but early learning is. That it's all built together. That unless you have those high quality interactions, that the brain is not forming correctly. So,
and one thing I've been learning, from the Spark New Hampshire work and just attending the committees, and I may not be on all of the committees, but one of the great things about going to Concord every month is getting to meet people who are on those committees and sharing and hearing about their practices. And of course, they're all available on the Spark New Hampshire website as well. Yeah. But in our region, from our own research, we know that there is an issue or a challenge for parents finding care, first of all, that's affordable, but also not sometimes understanding what quality means. So I think when we go into strategic planning, which will happen this fall, that will be one of the focus areas, I believe, that will come up to the top is affordability, lack of access, and what does quality mean? So not just necessarily dropping children off in a place that you don't know a lot about. And I think in our region, we do have some challenges around home-based care. So there is a large segment of our population that cannot afford or is unable to get transportation to quality childcare. And therefore, grandma, grandpa is looking after the child, a partner, a neighbor. Many of these are not accredited, they're not licensed, and so therefore there's no standardization for quality. And then I think, as Laura's mentioned, there's also a lack of understanding about those early years. A lot of people still think that brain development just happens all on its own and doesn't need any kind of encouragement or support. So what Laura said about truly understanding and how to work with that brain development in those early years, those formative early years, is really important. So parents, I think, also need some help understanding that, particularly if parents are staying home with their children. We want to make sure that those serve and return interactions are happening as well. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in our region around what Spark is doing at the state level. So having access to their research and their information and what they're doing around quality and standards is really important for us.
So we have the quality and standards piece, and I know both of you have been doing a lot of community awareness and outreach. And I believe we have another slide. What are some other areas that you're really focusing on, either from a statewide perspective or Marge, that you see us really beginning to develop here at the local level as part of developing a strategic plan?
Well, I mean, policy is a key piece. Now, Spark New Hampshire is technically a part of the executive branch, so we'll never do lobbying. But there are policies. We can certainly educate about policies. And you know, one of the things when we think about early learning, for example, quality is expensive. To ensure that people have the training that they need to best help children succeed, it can be expensive, and as Marge pointed out, that causes problems for accessing high quality care. And that's why we need to develop innovative ways, you know, both through government support and through private sector support, to figure out ways to make sure that children have access to those high quality experiences. So that's an example of one of the policies that we talk about in our policy committee.
And can you actually give us an example of where that's happening in the state?
Sure. I mean, so there are lots of organizations that are involved with particular policies, and we have a number of policies. We're soon going to release our framework for action, which is basically our policy priorities across health and early learning and family support. And access to high quality early learning is one. Another, as an example, would be access to home visiting in our health priorities. And in family support for family resource centers is another example. And all of those policies, if you will, are being worked on in other places than Spark New Hampshire, but Spark New Hampshire is sort of lending its seal of approval, and will do a lot of education around those in the future.
I know one of the initiatives that I found really interesting was, I believe Plymouth is involved with it, with North Country in Coos County.
Yeah.
Really engaging young people in wanting to pursue an education in early childhood and providing access to scholarships and tuition assistance. And to then bring those young people right back into the North Country and Coos to provide service. And, you know, what a great concept. When we think about our young people, we worry so much that they're leaving New Hampshire.
That's right.
And this is an incredible way to not only, you know, address the economic growth of our state, but to embrace our young people and really providing that quality care in a way that crosses generations. And at the same time builds our foundation for strong young people, and for our a little bit older millennial groups and some of the other groups that are entering the workforce, and to do it with these quality standards.
Right, right. Well, so you're referring to the COAS Coalition for Young Children and Families, which is actually the first early childhood effort that began in the state, and they are largely funded by a program of the charitable foundation called the Tillotson Fund. And that's just one of the things that they're doing, the workforce efforts that you mentioned. They're also doing really innovative things around developmental screening for children, and that's also one of Spark New Hampshire's policy priorities. And I think all of the early childhood initiatives across the state are focused on developmental screening, and that's where you make sure that you're looking for any issues that might arise for children that might slow their development or identify disabilities, so that we can address them as early as possible so children have their best chance of success. And it's also, to sort of boil it down to dollars and cents, it makes the most sense to intervene the earliest. Problems just grow if they're unattended. And so developmental screening is a really great investment to make sure that we can get children what they need early on. The other thing that COAS is doing that's really innovative is addressing maternal and paternal depression. They do screenings at well child visits to make sure that mom and dad are doing okay, because untreated depression in parents can have a terrible impact on the family. And on the child. So that's another thing, but that's the kind of thing that we talk about at the community of practice that Marge was talking about.
And that's great for the Monadnock region to hear about these things, because we're not yet into strategic planning, but we will be. And certainly I can bring to the table some of the focus areas that other early childhood initiatives in New Hampshire are focusing on. And just from my own research, I know, for example, that social and emotional health is a big issue in our region. We know that from the needs assessment that prioritized child welfare, child abuse, neglect, and so on as an area of concern in our region. So I think, hearing from other regional coordinators what they're doing around social and emotional well-being is important for our region. But another thing I wanted to jump into is that Laura was talking about the screening and the developmental screening, and this is one of the issues that was brought up in our community of practice, but also in the data committee, was how to get access to this data. Is it being reported? Is it being collected? And we know, certainly in the Monadnock region, that data is really important to prove that something's working. And you need it to properly evaluate what you're doing. And certainly Impact Monadnock is an evidence-based, is very concerned with evidence-based methods. So I think what we're going to be working with at the state level is important for our region, because we need to have some kind of uniform system where we can at least see each other's data, we can contribute to it, we can collectively use it around early childhood practices. So I think that's something that the region badly needs, because our data is scattered all over the place in different formats. It's sometimes collected, sometimes it isn't. There are reporting issues. And in our world today, you can't do things properly without data, honestly. So.
And it's interesting you bring that up, because the United Way is in a unique position to be able to collect data from our service organizations that we support. But this is a much larger initiative where you have multiple people really engaged in this as part of the collective impact approach. So then collecting that information from all these diverse populations becomes that much more critical, so that you can really see where people are intersecting. And we have some incredible things going on here in the Monadnock region. I know Keene Daycare Sulaine Poling was the recipient of Strengthening Families. So that's a strong evidence-based program going on here in the region. How do you bring that to scale and really be sharing that and be collecting that kind of data? I know the Ages and Stages, that all United Way funded programs now are using Ages and Stages, but you have a lot of these private licensed home care facilities or licensed care public facilities here in the region that may not be using that same tool.
So the Ages and Stages questionnaire, that's the developmental screening tool that is being used in many of the programs across the state, and also at the statewide developmental screening effort, Watch Me Grow. And I want to just pause for a second and say, when we talk about data, we're not talking about individual children's data. We're talking about de-identified data. We never want to have at the state level information about particular children. We want to have information about groups of children so that we can say, well, here's the trend, here's something that's coming up that's a real issue that we need to deal with. So I think that that we're very careful at the state level about, when we talk about data, that we're protecting privacy always at the individual level. But we want to be able to see whether the interventions that we're doing, whether the interventions for maternal depression actually help folks, whether the interventions for young children who have developmental delays are helping so that we can repeat them in other places if they are.
And that's very true, I think, even collecting data here at the local level. You know, we collect from all of our organizations. We're not collecting individual level data. What we're really looking to is, are they effective practices that are trying to work with these you know, children? I think of the seniors, and that's one of the ones I know that the daycare centers, for example, have brought up a lot. Are we really addressing the needs of some of our seniors that may be caring for their children? And so they're trying to collect information to see what those needs are, so that it can be brought to scale in a bigger way. So it's exciting that, you know, we have this statewide structure, we have a local initiative that's been developed. I know a steering committee is forming. There's ways people can be involved at the state level. Is that through the committee involvement, or are there other ways people can be involved?
Yes, I mean, the committees are certainly the, if you want to be a part of the work that's going on at Spark New Hampshire, the committees are the place to be. But there are ways to get involved that are in your own community in terms of helping with our public awareness work, making sure people understand that early brain development and the importance of the early years. That's something that you can connect to in your own community, because Marge is doing a lot of that work here.
Yeah, it's been great, actually. The reception from people living in our community has just been overwhelmingly positive. In fact, we should probably show your video now, because this video is very similar to the videos that we've been showing throughout the Monadnock region.
So we're going to bring you to a video, and this is from the state level. This is a public awareness video?
Yes. This is a video that we've recently made. It was narrated by our great champion, Scott Spradling, who is on the board of the agency that is our fiscal agent, Early Learning New Hampshire. And he narrates this video. It was put together using a lot of the research-based work that we use to inform all of our work.
So we're going to roll that.
We are the Granite State. We've long relied on our ingenuity and independent thinking to get us through tough times. And we need to harness that ingenuity to find creative solutions to the challenges that confront us now. One of our biggest challenges is that our children face a future very different from past generations, and they are relying on us to prepare them for that future. The good news is we know what to do. Science tells us that the early years of life serve as the foundation for all future health and learning, and we know that you can't build anything sturdy on a shaky foundation. That's why when we provide children with supportive environments today, we are also building a healthy, educated workforce and citizenry for tomorrow. That means working together to put our most innovative ideas and best materials to work for our children, who will one day live in, work in, and lead our state, and are the real bedrock of the Granite State. Care to join us in shaping the future of New Hampshire? To find out what you can do, connect with Spark New Hampshire by visiting our website and seeing our action steps.
So there's a great example of a way to engage with Spark New Hampshire. If people are really interested in policy and advocacy at the state level and getting involved in early childhood. And at the local level, Marge, they can reach out to you and also be doing public awareness and community outreach, really helping people understand how to build this strong foundation in our early years for our young people. So Spark New Hampshire, your website is?
Yeah, SparkNH.com.
That's an easy one.
Yeah.
And ours is impactmonadnock.org. And as you rightly said, at the moment we're building our infrastructure, so there's lots of opportunities for community members to be a part of that. I am recruiting at the moment for our steering committee, and the steering committee will represent across all constituencies, all the way from business through to early education and parents. and the community, because this is a collective impact initiative, will truly be leading the way. You know, we know what our vision is, but what we don't know more specifically is how to achieve that vision. So starting in late August, early September, the steering committee will go into strategic planning and hopefully emerge in spring 2016 with a plan of goals and objectives and specific strategies to achieve this wonderful vision of Spark and Impact Monadnock, which is that all our children, and I also emphasize the word all, because we're not just focusing on a particular socioeconomic group, for example, but it truly is all of our children deserve the right to be healthy, learning, and thriving, and right along with them, their families too. So, but how to achieve that in the Monadnock region and what particular areas to focus on, that's going to be the job of the steering committee. So we're almost completed with recruitment for that, but where the community can also be involved then is work groups, partnerships, and simply being helpful to us in building public will. So one of the things I say out in the community is, have you asked your state legislator what are they doing to support thriving children and families up in Concord? Are you talking to your local school board officials? You know, what initiatives can they launch or join with Impact Monadnock on to support the birth to 5 population? You know, we don't have universal pre-K in our state. We're ranked low, in fact, on many ranking points around early childhood. So what can we do at the regional level that also aligns with what's happening at the state level in an advocacy way to support this work? So talking to legislators, calling your local city officials, your school board officials is really important part of building public will. And I'm happy to assist them in doing that, you know, providing them with names and numbers. So it's an easy way to help.
So there's a role for advocacy, but I'm sure many of our viewers may be saying, well, you know, I own a business downtown. Why should I be involved in this? It's not my responsibility. Why is it everyone's responsibility? When we talk about collective impact, we're talking about everyone, whether you come from law enforcement, business. You know, and lots of times people say, well, you know, I'm not taking care of children.
Right. So it really is about the future, all our futures, because we're talking about a workforce pipeline, if you will. You know, if we don't put in the investment into our children, then when they come out of the workforce pipeline, we're not going to have the kind of workers that we hope to have.
Or the kinds of parents we hope to
absolutely.
have.
Oh, absolutely. But you mentioned a business
Yes.
owner, so I was
Yeah.
speaking to that. But I think that's right. I mean, I think that, and that's why people say that it's such a good investment, because if we can invest early, head off problems, and make sure that we can have really successful members of our society, then we do so much better ultimately.
So who should be involved, Marge?
So on the steering committee, for example, we're having business people involved on the steering committee, and for a variety of reasons. You know, one of the stats that I love that Spark uses is this idea that a child born today will graduate in 2033 and needs to have the type of brain that can cope with jobs that haven't even been invented yet. So the type of brain that's flexible enough to learn, to relearn, and learn again. You know, careers that we haven't even heard of, that in 2033 all the way up to retirement in 2050, they're going to have to know how to do. But if they're not invested in that birth to 5, when 90% of brain development is occurring, then we're not going to have those type of workers. So businesses need to just connect those dots, first of all, and that's through education and awareness. But they also need to be involved in investing in their own work sites, because one of the biggest challenges that parents in the Monadnock region have spoken to me about is the fact that they don't have work sites that are not necessarily family friendly. We do have some standouts like Badger, for example, that are very work site friendly, but they are not the norm in our region. So one of the biggest stressors that parents are dealing with is, what do I do with my child when I need to be at work? And they're not just working 9 to 5. Many of our parents, especially our single parents, are working second shifts, third shifts, where are they going to find the type of care that's open till 6 or 7 o'clock at night, or open at 6:30 a.m. when they need to be at work at 6:45 a.m.? So when I talked about quality, that's important, but access is really important too. So wouldn't it be great if our companies could actually assist with providing some more family-friendly work policies, such as what Badger is doing? You know, Keene State has an on-site center, but that's hard to get into if you're not an employee of the college. We know Cheshire Medical Center has an on-site child care center, but that's for employees only. It's not open to the public. So there's very few companies that provide on-site care. And it doesn't have to be just that. It could be, you know, implementing a policy that extends parental leave when a child is born, or allowing a parent to be more flexible with their sick days. For example, allowing them to not be have pay cut or holiday or vacation use because they're having to care for a sick child at home. So there's lots of different things that companies can do to help our families thrive, and not just the children.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up, because I worked on an initiative probably 20 years ago, and one of the things that we talked about at that time, and it still holds true today, is that people care more about having flexible schedules in the workforce than they do about their salary. They would rather have a flexible schedule than get a raise. And that I know for me, at the time when I was a single mom, having that flexibility in my schedule was critical. And when we think about the virtual world that we live in now, we're so capable of creating those environments for people. So really being innovative, really thinking about what we can be doing differently, as practitioners, as businesses, as parents, as grandparents.
Well, one of the great things about collective impact is that it looks at low cost or no cost strategies. Things don't have to be expensive. You know, I was a single parent too, and one of the things that stressed me out completely was not just getting my child to where they needed to be, but also the aftercare issue as well. So, you know, we have a lot of 5-year-olds who are in kindergarten environments that don't extend for the full day, and also preschool environments that don't extend for the full day. And I don't know any parent that can get out at noon and then stop working. So if we could use technology, be a little bit more flexible, and let's take away the guilt of being a parent who also happens to be a working parent. I think that's one of the big emotional stressors, is that guilt factor, and also the fear that if you leave your job to take care of a sick child, or you take an extended paternity or maternity leave, is that same job going to be there when you get back, or are you going to be demoted, for example, because you took some time? So I think there's a lot of work to be done on that front.
I like that you highlighted the stress and the guilt that's attached to that, because when you think about it, if we remove that, and I think there's a lot of studies that have been done on this, that you become a much more productive workforce when you do not have to worry about your children and their safety. Everybody wants to know that people in their lives are safe. When we can do that, we're capable of creating a more productive workforce.
Right. I mean, one of the policy priorities, again, that Spark New Hampshire has on its list is supporting after school and actually summer programs for young children. Summer is a time that children often will lose some of the skills that they've gained through the year, and then that after school time, as Marge pointed out, is very much a stress factor for parents. That's often the time when kids are most at risk, and so supporting that time is really important.
And I find it interesting, I read in the newspaper the other day that there's a big movement to bring your dog to work day. Yet we only have one day to bring our child to work. And yet dogs are coming to work often, you know, sometimes
Every
4
day.
and 5 days a week. So I find it interesting that there's this big movement about bringing your animals and the stress relief that brings. But I know that it would have been great to bring my child to work with me if I needed to, without stressing about it and feeling that it was frowned upon. So I think there needs to be some policies put into place, because right now it's very informal. And that's not the best way to protect an employee. You need to have policies and procedures that are set in stone that protect the employee who has a child. And, you know, let's make it easier for us to bring our children to work. Even if it's just on a periodic basis. You know, I love dogs, don't get me wrong, but I think it would be easier to bring a child. To me, it would be more helpful than bring my dog, much as I love her. But.
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly flexible workplace is important, but I think that, you know, even more important than that is to have a place where my child can be most supported, and you know, make sure that their development is occurring in a great way. I might have had a hard time. My kids were awfully active to bring to work.
And probably a lot of parents would say that, or say, I need that break, you know,
Well, there's
just
that
to get away. But knowing that we have strong support systems in place to really work with us, if we can't bring them to work, you know, the after school, the summer camp programs.
Which are expensive.
They
Right
are,
now,
and
yeah.
you know, but if we think about that collective impact approach and we really look at how do we bring all of this together towards that thriving children and family goal, you know, we can be very creative, and it brings the resources together in a very different way.
Right. And this is really about meeting parents where they are. You know, we're talking also about stay-home parents and making sure that they have the skills they need. Rather supports they need to thrive, to help their children thrive. We're talking about working parents. We're talking about single parents. We're talking about, you know, different kinds of families, and making sure that all children have the opportunities. That
And
they
new parents. You know, I can't think of a scarier thing than being a new parent. And, you know, I'm watching with fascination right now. I have two friends that have just recently have children, their first children, and they're constantly on Facebook posting, you know, oh my gosh, my child's throwing up all the time. Is this normal? You know, they're spitting up every time they eat. And, you know, it's a scary time in people's lives when we're first introduced to children.
And I'd also like to mention another group that I've come across going out with these presentations, and that's those parents who are homeschooling. So I think we also need to be very supportive of them as well, because there's a large population in New Hampshire, actually, that does a homeschooling. It's pretty prevalent here. So how can we also be supportive of their efforts too? But along those lines, you know, bringing businesses on board, we're going to be having a business forum, a regional business forum on Wednesday, October the 14th.
Oh, how exciting.
And we want everybody to come. It's open to the public. It's going to be held at Keene State College's Alumni Center. It's from 7:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. Breakfast is provided. And we've got some amazing keynote speakers who are coming. But again, this shows the region's connection to the state and to Spark, because the state is also having a business forum on October 5th. And that idea is lending ours momentum. So theirs will happen, and then ours will ride that wave here in the region. So, you know, all these connections, state to region, are constantly going back and forth. Because when I heard about the state one, I thought immediately, wow, wouldn't it be great if we can have one for the Monadnock region corporate community as well. So.
And I really want people to hear that we're not just talking about the corporate or the business community. That is one key player in this, because it is our future workforce. But you're also talking about anyone. Anyone and everyone, that we all have a role in this, whether we're the neighbor to someone and maybe have no children of our own, whether we're the caretaker, whether we work in our schools or our daycare centers, or we're a service provider potentially that's supporting the other needs of that family that help them be strong and thriving. So there's so many roles, law enforcement, fire departments, you know, they all have a role in the lives of our children.
Right, and at the state level, we have representatives of all of those groups involved, but it's so important to have at a regional level, because your community is different, and this is really about ensuring that we have the kind of communities in the future that we want. So both the work at the state level and the local level is trying to achieve that.
And there's a great story that I tell at these presentations that kind of illustrates your point, Kelly, because I often have people say to me, well, I'm not a parent, I'm not a grandparent, and I don't have any dealings with children whatsoever, so how could I be involved, or how would this touch my life? And I interviewed a director of an early childhood initiative in another part of the country, just to kind of get their ideas about, how do you connect people who may not automatically think I'm connected to thriving children and families. And she told the true story about how they had a homeless shelter that was just burgeoning with children and families. And they didn't know what to do to help keep these children continuing their education or somehow getting some kind of brain development, because they had a lot of very young children who were homeless. And so they reached out to the community, and a senior center had people who were seniors who wanted to volunteer, and so they connected both of these organizations, and the seniors came daily to the homeless shelter to read to those very young children. So they may not have had grandchildren of their own, but they formed these wonderful bonds with children who actually became like their surrogate children through this. So there's lots of ways to be involved, whether or not you have children.
And there's lots of ways to be involved here in the Monadnock region. If people feel like, wow, I don't have the time to commit to a state level committee, or to commit to even the local level committees and perhaps planning and organizing this, there's ways to be involved by volunteering. You can volunteer for organizations. We have America Reads. We have college students involved with that. We have seniors involved in that here in the region through RSVP. Lots of opportunities for people to engage in this and feel a part of it. Whether you want to be at the big level in affecting policy with our legislative unit, or you just maybe want to touch the life of an individual child and their family. So lots of ways for people to be involved. Any last thoughts from either of you?
We like to say that children are the bedrock of the Granite State, that we're really, shaping the future of New Hampshire by investing in those early years.
And I just would love to say that for the Monadnock region, we're really lucky to have Spark and Early Learning New Hampshire and other state organizations to help guide us, because I've used so much of their work already. The fact that they're part of our backbone organization with Monadnock United Way has just been outstanding. So, I think our region is really benefiting from this state connection. So, thank you.
Well, and it goes both ways. The work at the policy level, at the state level, isn't rich until it's informed by the work of regional initiatives. That really makes our work so much deeper.
So Laura, Spark New Hampshire, I want to thank you for
thank you
joining
so
us today.
much.
I'm Marge Dropper from Impact Monadnock.
Thank you.
Opportunities to be involved with you by giving time and supporting your efforts through advocacy and volunteerism. I want to remind you, public, that this is about living united, being a part of making a difference in the lives of our citizens by giving, by volunteering, by advocating. Thanks for joining us.